There's a tightrope to walk where if you go too far towards advocating for any one group, you fall off the ledge. If you're business oriented so much that the employee base doesn't trust you or doesn't respect you, you don't have the hearts and minds, then you fail. You're already disrupting something significant with your product or service if you're a startup founder. Get the basics right, and let's understand what those are. If you're a founder, don't break into an industry. The most effective founders are people that understand an industry deeply. We have enough Stanford engineer dropouts building products for industries and businesses that they don't understand. I think what the world really needs more of is people that know the problem, that know the business and the industry, and get matched with the resources that can help solve that problem.
Welcome to another episode of Forging the Future, and today we have a distinguished guest, Andrew Bartlow. So Andrew is a thought leader in organizational effectiveness with over 25 years of experience in human resources and talent management. He's a co-founder of People Leader Accelerator, founder and managing partner at Series B Consulting, and operating partner at Altamont Capital Partners. Andrew, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, Chris. Really great to be with you.
We're coast to coast, all the way from Houston to San Francisco today. How is it out in the Bay Area?
It's hot. It's uncommonly hot. About 100 degrees out here right now.
Well, we just navigated a hurricane here, so it's wacky summer, I think, for everybody. So, wow, you've had an impressive career. Maybe you can share a few of your early roles at Pepsi and General Electric and how they shape your approach to human resources and business practices.
Sure. So coming right out of grad school at University of Illinois, I started it at Pepsi and was fortunate enough that it was a great job market at the time and had some choices. And Pepsi was known at the time, and I think it still is, for having potentially the world's strongest HR function, maybe only equaled by General Electric. So as I progressed in my career and I went from Pepsi to a startup and then I went to General Electric, it was, from quality to entrepreneurialism back to quality. And I've kind of had that ping pong back and forth throughout my career with, be part of the best at whatever it is that I do. And, that's a great environment to learn in, and then test yourself by jumping into the deep end and, try to run your own function, which I've done, several times. And maybe to get to the core of your question, like what was special about GE and Pepsi, they had decentralized operating units with individual P&Ls that were split out by business unit and by geography. So very early on, there were general manager groups. And so managing your own P&L, and I wasn't managing my own P&L, I was the HR leader for multiple little P&Ls. But that's a different experience in being a little cog in a big corporate machine. You're the head of your function at a fairly autonomous unit, and you've got to figure out how to make it work. And so I think Pepsi and GE exemplified that, and had really strong operating practices and held people accountable, and that's one of the reasons why they're known for having great management teams.
Yeah, I know a little bit about, of course, GE, and it's Jack Welch, right?
I was there at the transition of Jack and Jeff.
Oh, okay, all right. And so a lot of influence from him on the culture there. I wonder how it happened at Pepsi. It sounds like, as far as culture, a lot of it has to be planned, right? But sometimes it can be accidental. Was there someone at Pepsi that was really instrumental in kind of setting up the culture in this way that it had such a strong, talent?
I honestly don't know all the roots of it. But when I joined Pepsi, Kevin Cox was the chief HR officer, and he went on to be CHRO of American Express, and I think he may have just retired as CHRO of GE. So they share a lot of the same DNA across those organizations. And Pepsi was really known for having a strong sales culture. They were a little edgy too. They were Netflix before, the Netflix culture manifesto came out. Like they measured daily sales and people were held accountable and it's a fast moving business and we measured everything. And so, HR people at both organizations, and I've carried this with me, were expected to support the organizational goals, not be union stewards, not be, social justice warriors. Our jobs existed to help the organization meet its goals.
In a good way, right? I mean, a lot of people think HR is there for the employee. It's supposed to be there for the organization, but I think then people also go too far in treating HR like, well, only having the interests of the organization in mind,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
there's a Goldilocks zone. There's a tightrope to walk where if you go too far towards advocating for any one group, you fall off the ledge. If you're
Mm.
business oriented so much that that the employee base doesn't trust you or doesn't respect you, you don't have the hearts and minds, then you fail. And if you
Wow.
are an employee advocate to the detriment of the company and its best interests, then you lose influence as well. So it's understanding who your stakeholders are and finding the right tightrope to walk.
So after being at both of those world-class organizations, what were some of your key lessons you took away from those?
I think one important lesson is it's about the business. Understand how what you're doing connects to the organization's goals. And when I say business, I don't want people to believe that's just like revenue or profit. Like your business might be a nonprofit. Your business might have a mission or a purpose to, feed hungry people or to, cure cancer. So whatever the purpose of your organization is, that's the goal. That's what you should be working on in HR. And I think connecting your work most closely, most directly with whatever it is your org is trying to accomplish is it is a key lesson. And I think I take it for granted a lot of times, but it's a foreign concept to a lot of HR practitioners that are often used to doing the list of HR stuff. Like, hey, here's the HR playbook, and here's all the things that we should be doing that are best practices. But what I think is really firm grounding, or was for me, is understanding why we're working on anything. So have that firm foundation of it's about the business first.
Not just recruiting, et cetera, like you said, but I mean, how do you make that connection? If I was someone in HR, I mean, how do I make sure I'm doing that?
Boy, I do a lot of this in the programs that I teach and the one-on-one mentoring. Like we really start by talking about this issue and building awareness. Like a lot of people just hasn't really occurred to them in that framing. And I'll build a couple of different mental models for folks. One is a waterfall, trickling down from top to bottom, or imagine it like an org chart with the CEO at the top and frontline, managers and management um, between. Um, Draw a line between what the org is trying to accomplish. Imagine boxes at the top to the initiatives that will help make that happen, to the stuff that you're working on in HR. Like something supports something, which supports something else. And if you're working on something way off the page that's not directly connected, you might be marooned out on HR Island, working on stuff that nobody cares about, that isn't core and central. So, like, try to draw that direct linkage, and test yourself by actually trying to draw it.
So these bigger corporations, they kind of organize into smaller business units. So does that mean that you don't have to be a Fortune 500 company to implement this type of approach to HR? Can you do that in a startup?
Yeah, organizing into smaller business units. Yeah, I think that's just one way of making a big company feel smaller. Now, if you're already a small company, how much smaller does it make sense to get? I don't know. I don't think you need to continue to subdivide down to the cellular level for that to make sense. Um, but I think the idea of having each functional leader understand that their function and their role is to support the overall organization's goals, not their function's goals, is a key concept. Patrick Lencioni talks about this in Five Dysfunctions of the Team and the Advantage. The team, the concept of one team. Like if your first team is the executive team and we together are helping to meet the organizational goals, that's when you're healthy. If your first team is your function and you're looking at your functional goals, that's where you get into, intra company and intra departmental friction and strife, and you start working on the wrong stuff.
Maybe an example would help. I mean, what would be an example of a company goal that HR would be trying to tie to or draw a line to?
So really, really common goal is let's increase revenue, right? So, hey, we are in human resources. What can we do to increase revenue? What does that look like? It shouldn't take a whole lot of creativity to think about a few areas. One might be, do we have the most effective leadership in place for our go-to-market team? Maybe we need to hire a chief revenue officer or coach up and mentor our VP of marketing. Where I'm going with that is we might have something around executive talent management that could help it. Another area that might link to it in terms of increasing revenue, sales team effectiveness. Do we have effective incentive plans in place that align the pay and the interests of your outside sales team with what the company is trying to accomplish? Or is it being gamed in some way that's at the detriment of the organization? Any comp plan is always gamed, but like, is it working or not? Another might be Salesforce effectiveness. So, what are you doing in terms of hiring and onboarding and training your sales team? These are all areas that HR can support. What's your time to productivity for a new hire? Do you have too much turnover within your sales team? Yeah, I find HR folks are often focused on turnover, but not necessarily as targeted or as directed as where I'm going with this. Like if you're trying to increase revenue, focus on your sales team, focus on your go to market. It might not be as important to go deep in engineering or product or finance. Like, sure, that'll be helpful, but our priority right now should be clear. So those are a few examples. I could give a ton more, but like use good judgment, use critical thinking around how could we potentially, support this area. Don't just run the same old playbook.
No, I think that's very interesting, and I think a lot of people, when you first talk to them about like, oh well, how can we help the company increase revenue? They're like, well, I'm not in sales, right? So, what am I supposed to do? I'm in HR or I'm in production or something. But it turns out there are things once you start brainstorming about it, like how could we affect it? And those are really great examples.
Thanks.
So you've also been involved with a lot of M&A and multiple IPOs early in your career, which is quite remarkable. Maybe tell us a little bit about specific experience from this period that significantly impacted your professional journey.
Oh boy, I've had so many hard knocks and barked shins along the way. I've been bought, I've been sold, I have bought, I have sold, I've been divested. Every angle at which in my in-house career, which lasted 25 years in-house and now maybe 5 independent, largely working with a PE firm. So I've been a part of multiple bankruptcies, multiple IPOs, a whole ton of M&A,
The whole roller coaster
the whole
journey.
roller coaster, and then like multiply that times 5 in terms of pace. Once I started working in PE, it just got accelerated because there's so much more going on in that space. So what was particularly poignant for me, like what really stood out? I don't know. I mean, one big realization was perspective is massively different depending which side of the fence you're on. If you are the acquirer, you understand intentions and you give a lot more. I don't know. You give a lot more leeway towards how things are being done because you understand that it's with good intentions and you're trying to answer things quickly and trying to make things work out well. If you're the acquiree, you tend to be a lot more cynical and skeptical, and we humans are difficult. And so there's this trust gap, there's this communication gap, depending which side of the fence you're on, and it has to do with knowledge and control, um, and belief in good intentions. And so that's something that was really powerful for me. having been on both sides, is that the assumptions and the emotions tend to be really different. And so if you can put yourself in the other shoes, or try to bridge the gap, that'll be really helpful in ensuring a smoother integration.
Well, empathy is really something that people need usually to work on quite a bit
Yeah.
more and be intentional about. So I think, yeah, having that perspective of both sides of the table, gives you an upper hand on understanding where people are coming from. But it's not always easy to do, right? But being on both sides, I can see how that could be an advantage. Well, you also wrote a book called Scaling for Success, specifically that focuses on scaling venture-backed companies. So maybe talk me through some of the concepts you discuss in that book.
Sure, sure. And if you're watching on video, it's no accident that it's right behind me.
It's a good place
Product
for it.
placement. Yeah, free
Yeah.
advertising, I guess.
Congrats on the book, though. I mean, that takes a lot of effort to write a book. So tell me a little bit
Yeah,
about
well,
it.
thank you. Well, for me, it was on my bucket list. I had stepped
Mhm.
out of the corporate world, Invitation Homes, which I was the head of HR for, had gone through yet another merger, and headquarters had moved to Dallas, and I wasn't on my way from California to Texas, so I pulled my parachute and was trying to figure out what to do with myself, and that's where the book came in. I spent about a year writing the book, trying to encapsulate my 25 years of HR experience at companies, big, medium, and small. And the reason for the book was, I guess I'll say this directly. This is a little spicy, Chris. Um, I live and work in the San Francisco Bay Area. Really the crucible. Austin's blowing up, and New York has its own thing going on, but really the crucible of venture-backed tech. And throughout the 2000s and the 2010s, and things have changed quite a bit post COVID. We'll talk about that. I've seen a lot of really questionable management practices, really questionable HR leadership decisions, like the ubiquitous foosball tables and kombucha bars in the office, and goat yoga, and all this eye rolly stuff that you get in Silicon Valley culture. Um, and, and honestly, I wrote the book in part as a reaction to that. Like, let's do our work better. Let's elevate the profession. And what does that look like? And I feel like I had the opportunity to cut my teeth in, arguably the world's best grad program for HR, and then arguably the strongest two HR functions in the world at Pepsi and GE. And so I had some grounding in what good looks like at scale, and then had a bunch of varied experience in companies, large, medium, and small along the way. And so the book was my attempt to try to help other HR people and leaders at startups understand what good could look like. Um, and so that's the reason for the book. And it really talks a lot about the basics. It's not about following progressive progressive practices and looking for the next hot thing and following trends. It's being brilliant at the basics and doing a few core things right.
I take it goat yoga isn't one of them.
Yeah, it's not top of the list. Yeah.
I don't think I ran across that. Definitely ran across a lot of the other things, but yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, I need to put your book on my reading list, and I think I can learn a lot from it, and also try to do something similar. We're trying to educate our startup founders on, not getting too far off the beaten path.
On that note, Chris, I like to say you're already disrupting something significant with your product or service if you're a startup founder. There's no need for you to disrupt decades of management practices. Like there's some
Mm.
things that are settled and are clear, and you don't need to add an extra spin and twist to your dive as you're trying to launch your startup. Like, get the basics right, and let's understand what those are.
The basics also include, I mean, like one of the mistakes I made as a founder was not concentrating on culture, for example, and being deliberate about it, which I have tried to do in the last 10 years, but I see a big impact from that. I do think there are some tech things coming out that you can utilize now, right? So kind of the annual review. I've always hated that, not being very effective, but doing kind of the like more the 15-5 style weekly check-in kind of management is I think interesting, right? Because it's more immediate and you get a shorter feedback loop. But how do you feel about some of those types of
Yeah,
tools?
I know those tools well. I just did a demo of 15.5 earlier this week. And I'm actually a semi-stealth SaaS founder as well, who's been on a journey to, create something that will compete with Lattice and 15.5 and Culture Amp and Leapsome and all those places. And yeah, I think you're right that continuous feedback, that more frequent, lighter touches is a more useful way to manage an org. And I love to rail against the idea of OKRs, the super heavy administrative burden that comes with setting quarterly, individual level targets and stretch goals. And by the time you do it, it's out of date. And especially if you're in a team-based knowledge worker environment, like most tech startups are, with things evolving and changing super rapidly, it's just the juice is not worth the squeeze. Um, the OKRs were popularized by Andy Grove in 1970s Intel, and so then all the investors that bounced out of that into the valley were trying to bring something helpful to their investments. And OKRs worked for Intel, but why should that work for a 25-person startup? It's a bad fit. Um, so yeah, I have strong professional opinions around like using the right tool for the right job. And by tool, I don't necessarily just mean software product. I mean, use the right process for where you're at as an org. Um, and the fact that Google is doing something doesn't mean that you should do it as a startup founder. In fact, it probably means you should not do it because there are massive differences between your startup and Google. In terms of maturity of organization, in terms of cash generation, in terms of experience of your manager team, pace of change. Like you should not be using the same tools and processes as a Google. So, you know, first principle thinking is great. Find something that fits, and at the same time you don't have to recreate the wheel. There's kind of a short list of some basic things that you can do.
Do you think there's going to be some disruption in the HR space?
It's been ongoing disruption for sure. Um, I think about core HRIS products like Workday is now 20 years old. Workday
Oh, really?
is, yeah, they're getting pretty creaky, and there are competitors that are starting to make some noise. Bamboo HR has captured the small company market, and Gusto has had a great run. Rippling is doing something really interesting in a walled garden format. Lattice, which is by far number one in performance management, has really extended its breadth, and they're building their own HRIS. Culture Amp, which is known for employee engagement surveys, is now doing performance management and is now doing other stuff. So a lot of these point solutions are trying to become fully packaged, full featured platforms, which ultimately extends to like the full HRIS operating system that can do everything for your organization. A lot like Workday has become.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea it was already 20 years old. But yeah, well, the world doesn't stop spinning, that's for sure. There's always someone nipping at your heels to do something better or differently.
Yeah, pretty sticky, pretty successful product, and their headquarters is just down the road from my house, so I don't want to make them too angry. But everybody's coming for you.
Yeah. Well, you're also deeply involved in mentoring, like you said, and supporting startups. Maybe tell us a little bit, maybe give us some advice on what you would give to new founders who are looking to break into an industry.
I'd say I'd start with don't. If you're a founder,
Yeah.
don't break into an industry. Like the most effective founders are people that understand an industry deeply. Um, I'll say this, in a somewhat antagonistic way. We have enough Stanford engineer dropouts building products for industries and businesses that they don't understand. Like technical founders that are, you know, trying to build solutions that they don't really know how it will fit together. I think what the world really needs more of is people that know the problem, that know the business and the industry, and get matched with the resources that can help solve that problem. One of my clients, Audit Board, is a really successful SaaS company. Just got acquired by H2 out of Europe, and they've been around for I don't know 10-ish years. They're a SaaS platform for auditors that was built by an auditor, knows the core need and solved it. I'm an HR guy. I know performance management topics. I think I can build a performance management tool that's better than stuff that, you know, really brilliant engineers have built.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, the best founders are somebody that are either trying to build a product that solves a problem that they
Yeah,
had, right, and they see that there's a need for, um, or that does understand a particular domain really well. Just the same thing, like people want to own a restaurant. The first step you shouldn't make is to go start a restaurant.
right.
It's like you shouldn't start a restaurant unless you've like gone and washed the dishes and been a maitre d' and waited tables and been back in the kitchen. And I feel that that would be my approach if I was going to think I was going to maybe run a restaurant. Also learn what it's like to run one, right? But also understand all those positions. And it doesn't take that long, right? To try to get in and learn, but you don't want to be just jumping in with both feet and have no clue.
Yeah, you don't want to, start from ground zero with potential customer interviews and pivot, pivot, pivot.
So that's definitely one pitfall, for example, right? I mean, right, don't start something that you don't really understand, in a domain you don't really understand. But I mean, maybe there's a few others. If we take that a little further, any other pitfalls maybe you see founders making?
Yeah, I'll extend this into management principles, and I'll challenge something that you, or I'll add some nuance, Chris, to something that you said earlier around, one of your learnings was to pay more attention to culture early on and build culture. And I'll share that a common issue that I encounter is that founders and OGs at early stage companies often try to hold on to the past for too long, and so that represents itself in culture, in decision making, in communication, in delegation, where when you're a small team of highly aligned, hardworking people, everybody kind of knows what everybody's working on, everybody knows what's important, communication flows really well, lots of trust, lots of understanding. If there's a misfit, it gets dealt with right away. If there's misunderstanding, it gets dealt with right away. When you have multiple layers and a breadth of geography, and the connection points are less rich. You might be on video instead of in person. You might be trading Slack messages or whatever rather than constantly on top of each other, like in the air quote good old days of startups. Um, then then your org has changed. Then the needs are different, and and you should be communicating differently. You should be operating differently. Um, More structure is needed. More communication is needed. Um, and I see a reluctance and a resistance often to repeating messages and sharing information more intentionally, more thoughtfully. Like you can go too far too. You can have all hands every week or every couple of days, and I see that there is a Goldilocks zone on this. And not everybody needs to be in the room for every decision. Like I've also seen, like there can be too much collaboration, so you get stuck in searching for consensus. Um, but I've seen this resistance to change. Not surprising. Um, in that what got us here feels comfortable and feels reliable, but it may not be what takes us there.
Yeah, that can be hard to learn, and it probably is rare that a startup founder takes it all the way from a startup to a public company, like the Zuckerbergs of the world. because you do need different skill sets, different people along the road, along the way. And yeah, I found the same thing, where the company gets to a certain size and you have a certain amount of people coming and going, right? And you feel like as a founder, you've had the business for a while and you're like, well, I've said all these things before, but you have to keep saying them because after a year or two, half the people in the business are either new or, there's a certain amount of turnover and they haven't heard you say it
Yeah.
before. But as a founder, you're like, well, I've said that 12
Right.
times, because I've been here for 5, 10 years, right? And it can be hard to learn that lesson. That's interesting.
Well, and there's really different work involved in being a great individual contributor versus being a manager slash supervisor of others versus being a leader. And the ratios of those change as your company grows and evolves, and your knee jerk, your gut instincts are probably different. Like you're probably as a founder more grounded in let me just do the thing. Let me just get on with it. Why do I have to do all this visioning and why are we in all these meetings? And I often see like a tilt towards the activation, um, or a mistrust, like in this middle management space of how do I know somebody's doing something if I don't see it and if I'm not approving it? And so there can be a reluctance to delegate along the way. And so it's easy to say, but it's important to say, and that is you've got to give your culture room to evolve and breathe and transform as you grow, or you'll stifle it.
That plus, like you said, trusting and delegating, and then growing. Right, as a founder, you have to learn those new skills. You start out, like even in my own career, start out doing the development myself, and at some point you're doing the management, and then at some point you're doing the operational piece of it, and then and now I'm more in that visionary seat than I would be in the operational piece of it, and that's all okay with me. I mean, I haven't been coding in quite a while. Every once in a while, a little pet project, but if you're some founders maybe don't want to do that and they're just going to be a small boutique firm and that's what you want to do. Not all firms are venture backed scalable companies either, right? So
Yeah.
kind of depend, like you said, figure out who you want to be. Well, this has been super interesting. I'm looking forward to reading your book because I'm sure some of these things are in there, and I'll put that on my reading list.
Don't buy it. Let me send you a copy, Chris.
Oh, all right, well, only if you sign it.
Deal. Deal. I might have a few laying around in the home office here.
All right, perfect. So we always, I'm big on socks. People who have listened to my podcast know that. So maybe share what socks you have on today.
Socks. I have these no-show socks. I'm going to hold them up to the camera. Let's see. Let's do a high kick. I've got There's the ankle. Uh,
Well, see, now you need some socks for me,
yeah,
some
I
Forge
could
in the
I could
Future
use a
socks.
pair of socks.
I've got my Texas rodeo socks on. I'm banging my own foot up
Oh
here,
wow,
but rodeo cowboy stuff on by today. But no, well, you California guys, you got to go with the chinos and no
it's
socks,
hot
right?
here. I don't need socks today.
Well, Andrew, thanks for being on the show today. Super interesting discussion. Your journey and insights have been very insightful. And have a great week and a great
Well,
weekend.
thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.